In this film, we're talking about layers and how they can be used to creative effect or for basic adjustments. So the first thing is, let's go over to the palettes over on the right hand side here, and we're going to drag out the layers palette. Now you can see that this image is made up of a whole combination of photographs, including some kind of crushed layers, so they're all kind of looking together. Let's unravel of what it is to begin with. So first of all, this is the original image. This is what it was shot with and things really, and what we've got there is basically the photograph. And then we've kind of got a background, and we've started to look at how we could use that background as a part of the photograph. Then looking at a tonality to actually bring the elements together. And then once they were all combined, we basically created a duplicate of those three layers when they were all used together. And from there, we then decided to actually add in some birds, some more birds, then adding in an adjustment layer throughout, finishing with a little bit of a masking to actually hide birds and things really, and eventually you ending up with the image, the fine art image. So it's made up of the basic photograph, the landscape image, and several different layers of the birds, as well as a color tone. So how do we use it? How do we do it? How do we get there and so on with it? Well, it's not as hard as you may think. The most difficult thing in Photoshop is basically how the layers interact with each other. So if we think about layers as being pages in a book, and if a page is made up of more of a tracing paper, you can see through it, and that's to do with the opacity. When we start to kind of wet a page, it starts to stick, and we start to have it in a different way how it interacts with the page below. So if we had a blue tracing paper and it got wet, it would actually start to either get darker or lighter, depends on its substance, the way it blends together, and we start to get a different image. So let's look at that in practice as such, how that same thing applies to a photograph. So the first thing is layers. How do we create more layers? Well, down at the bottom of the palette, you've got some icons here, and starting from right to left, we've got the trash can. That will be used to delete things. We've got then next create new layer. Then we've got an icon which is create a new group. I'll show you how to do that. Then we have adjustment layers, probably one of the most powerful things within Photoshop. Then we have masks. Then we have effects, and then we have linking things together. So first of all, let's duplicate a layer and see what it kind of does. So in other words, let's just drag this down onto the new layer, and this duplicates itself. The shortcut to that is Control J. So straight away I've added in another one there, and basically all I did was press on the keypad Control J. Let's delete that for now by dragging it to the trash. And let's start to kind of look at how these things can work together. Well, because they're exactly the same image for a minute, really there's nothing going to change, because if I change the way that these blend together, they'll have a little bit of effect when we darken and lighten, but really not as much effect when we start to add in color. As far as the opacity change is concerned, nothing really is going to have any benefit there, because obviously it's the same photograph and the same color tone and so on. If I just turn this image for a minute into a black and white, let's use an adjustment layer. We'll select into, my favorite way is channel mixer, and basically I'm going to convert it into monochrome. I'm going to go 78, 22 and 0. Now you can see we've got this adjustment layer, and basically it's above the other two. Now because we've got the same photograph below, if I switch that one layer off, it doesn't show anything different. However, if I wanted just to affect this image below, I can actually just press and hold my Alt key, hover between the two layers that I want to affect, and now this is only going to affect the layer below. So as I switch this one off now, you can see it now works independently. So we technically, these two layers are now one, even though visibility they are two. And basically they work independently because they are linked together with this little drop arrow. This is only affecting the one below. So they work independently when I switch this off. And this top layer has nothing to do with the bottom layer as such. So in the same way, we could work where we put these two layers into a folder. And let's just call this mono. So now, in the same way, by switching that on and off, they basically are together. If I want to add in, say, some text to the image, all I need to do is press either T on the keyboard or select T. Let's just do Angel. Drag the text into place. Now you can see already that we've got a new layer appear on this palette, and that is the text layer. So I can change the size of the font by either selecting a font or, just as I'm doing, using the scrubby to change the size. So the scrubby is basically this little finger tool with a left and right arrow by the side of it, and it allows you to press and hold the mouse and then kind of make it smaller or bigger, left smaller, right bigger. But the key thing is we've got another layer on top. So because this is a solid color, below it, in other words, the black and white layer, we can't see anything when it's hidden by the font. So if I change the opacity, of course, that's no longer the case. So this is like that transparent paper that was on about to you, or when something gets wet. So in the same way, we've got it now just being controlled by the opacity. However, we also have blend modes. And the blend modes, as I said, are probably one of the most complicated things to get your head around to begin with. But once you go through a little bit of a trial and error, you'll find that you're going to be able to actually use them to a big advantage. So I haven't made any selection around this image, but now what it's doing, I've put it into darken mode. So when it sees something light, it basically is turning it darker. And that's what we're trying to achieve with it. And then we have all the other options. In the top part here, this is going to affect the darks. Below, it's going to affect the lights. And then obviously you're going to affect the effects, as it were, overall. So if we just kind of go through those to begin with, in the darken mode, then we go into multiply, which will make it much darker. We just saw that. Color burn will kind of eat through and really kind of create, almost as you can see now, like a black on the other colors that is not touching anything. And then kind of going through then to the lighten and the screen, where it's lighter and brighter and affects more of a pastel kind of look, until we get to some of the effects. So if I wanted to add the text on here onto the dark background, you can see that the darken mode isn't so much the best blend mode, because it's already a dark font. So if we go to the lighten, we can see straight away that if I lighten this on the background, it's going to create a lighter effect, in the same way the screen will get lighter and lighter, and so on and so on. If I duplicated this layer, it duplicates the effect, the blend mode effect. So for instance, with the angel below now, it's basically not visible. But when we start to change its effect, that is the only time when it will start to actually get a little bit more visible to you and things, really. So if we go back into multiply to darken it, now you can see we've created almost a ghost effect with the font. Remember, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is how the layers interact with each other. That's the key thing. So if we now start to kind of link these together by using the link here, it means that when I drag the one layer, it drags the two layers together. If they're unlinked and I just select the one layer, it basically pulls it away from the other. So that's why we tend to use links if we know that we always want them to work together as such. Now you can see here how the blend modes are creating an almost font effect by the way that we've overlaid. So the top one is in screen, the bottom one is in multiply. They're both at 100% opacity, but as I drag them across to a different area, what has moved itself into a different kind of a transparent effect from above and below. So why would we want to use layers? Well, the key thing is so that we could add effects into the likes of the background. So we've got quite a kind of a blank background here, and we want something to create a little bit more texture on the background. So let's get an image with some background, and then we can add that look and feel to it. So I'm just going to grab a texture background and drag it onto my desktop. So now as I drag in the layer, you can see because we have a bounding box, this is the place command. However, it's smaller than the image in the background. You can tell that because it hasn't filled the whole page. So for me to make it bigger, I just press and hold the shift key while I drag out the sides. And now, of course, it's started to do its job. Now, the problem we've got here is that we've put this background layer above all the text layers. So if I don't want the text to be affected, I need to literally just drag the layer down until it is technically below the font. So now it hasn't been affected by the text that we have above. Now if we start to change the mode, we can start to see how it affects it. So I'm in darken mode here. So this is beginning to add a darkening to the lightness of the skins. And now with the multiply, it's beginning to add an overall effect, and it's making it darker in the background. So you can see just as we scroll through, it has a different effect as the different blend modes start to actually work together. And obviously, as I said to begin with, it's probably one of the most difficult things to actually get used to, which is the best one. But don't worry about it, persevere, and I promise you'll get there. So we've seen how they interact together. We can obviously change its opacity as well. We can even add a special effect to this background, making it soft or dark or light or blurred or colored. And in the same way, if we want to make that a specific color, we go to the solid color, we choose a color that we want, we press OK, and exactly the same way now we either change the opacity or we change its layer blend mode, or both. So now all of a sudden you can see how it starts to play its game across the whole image. The only ones that are not being affected at this point are the text layers. Why? Because they're basically above all that is going on below. In the same way, I can just affect that color to the background itself, and you can see now how all of a sudden it doesn't affect the photograph, the black and white, as much. Let me show you that again. So you can see now this color is passing through all of the layers below. If I use the Alt command to just click onto it, this color is only going to affect the background texture we put on. So now it's kept the color tone away from the black and white image below. So in the same way, we might not want to actually have the full text effect coming through onto the angel himself. And because this is an independent layer, we can select the texture layer and now click onto the mask, which is the kind of the square donut. And then we can paint onto here to reveal or hide. As the mask is white, we need to paint black to hide. If the mask was black, we would paint white to reveal. So as it is, because we've got a white mask, which is the default when you just click on the mask icon itself, basically it's always in the show all and it's ready for me to hide. So if I just press B for brush, D for default, that puts white back on top and black underneath. That might be because I've changed different colors. And then I just press X and that will put the black on top for me. Using just a different size brush, then what I can start to do now is start to actually paint through the angel image to take away some of the texture. So we start to actually see how it begins to actually change and blend. So what we can see next to the texture background layer is this mask, and now you can see black paint on the mask, which is hiding the texture effect on some of the angel's body and wings as I select and paint through. If I decide that the color is wrong on the text, of course, because these layers are independent, I can just click off and choose a color that most suits the look and the feel to the image. So when anything is on a layer, it's technically adjustable in some way and independently adjustable as well. So if I was to duplicate this layer here now, and I right click that layer, and I basically just rasterize the type. This means I can't edit it anymore. So you can see how the T of the text is gone, and now we're just actually got a kind of looks like a blank layer. But in the same way here, if I basically just control click into this layer, it makes an instant selection of what we're seeing. So at this point, I can now go ahead and just V for the move tool, just kind of copy that. But in fact, what I want to do is select the angel image itself. And that's what I want to make a new layer from. So what I'm doing is basically showing you how we can create selections of pictures. So you can see I've got his face here within the font itself at the top. And we can also use the same techniques and the blend modes to be able to see through the image itself. So layers, let's just recap quickly what we just did. We started off with the basic image. Then we looked at how we added in a basic font. Then we duplicated the font and changed its blend mode. We looked at then adding a duplication of the image and adding in an adjustment layer. In this case, it was a channel mixer to make it into black and white. Then what we did, we added in a background by dragging it in, making it bigger, and then adding it into the overall photograph, but by using the mask to paint out some of the texture so it began to actually look like it belonged together. So this is our first real stage of using layers. Bit complicated, I know, but the blend modes are the ones to practice with because they'll have the greatest effect as you start to get better and better with your skills within Photoshop. If we leave this image open, as it were, so with all the layers open, we really need to save this photograph as a PSD, a Photoshop PSD file. Okay, so if we just call this angel, put it into here for now, and it will just call it angel texture. Could be a cover of a book, couldn't it? Let's press save, press OK, and then basically let's flatten it. So we'll go into layer, flatten image, press OK. But now we're going to save the image as a normal JPEG. Very important to make sure you either give it a new name or you save it as a new file, because otherwise when you flatten it, basically you've lost the image. So if we now go in and file open, you can see we've got two different files here, angel texture cover, and then we've got the angel texture cover, but now it's showing it's a PSD file. If we double click on the PSD file, all the layers remain and fully adjustable for us to do exactly what we want to.